am Abdurrahman. I'm a lecturer at a public university in Kenya. I deliver lectures in computing and informatics. In our last lesson, we discussed about user-defined type 2 function. Basically, we talked about how we define it as the one which has got no argument, but it retakes a return value. In today's lesson, we are going to talk about what is the type 3 user-defined function. And in that particular journey, we are going to take up the definition of it, the syntax, and finally, as usual, we are going to implement it. So let's start. What is actually the type 3 user function? So actually the type 3 user function, it takes actually the same, either argument or no argument. So type 3, it is actually the one which takes up an argument. It takes up the first part, it takes up an argument. So if it takes up the argument, then that particular argument can never be void. So this particular argument, they can either be an integer, a character, or a float. So it has to take one of these primary data types as, or any other data types as the argument. So it has to take some argument. Number 2, it does not take any return data type. So as a result of that, it cannot take any of these, and it must take actually void. So the only thing it can take up, it is void. So that one actually takes us to the next part of it. What is the syntax? So basically, the syntax of it should have a data type, and this data type must be void, and then it should have a function name, and then should have some parameter list. Should have some parameter list, and this particular parameter list should be one of this, and this void should be one of this. So this is the syntax, and then we are going to have opening, closing curly bracket, and then you are going to have our body here. So basically that is the syntax. Now the next part of it, we are going to see how we are going to implement it. So to implement that, we are going to take up a program whereby a user should enter 2 numbers to multiply. So how are we going to do it? So our function, basically, we had say it have no return data type. So our function will be void, and then we'll have up a function name, and in this particular case we are going to call it mult, and then should take up some parameter list. So we are going to take up a 2 parameter list, since we are telling a user to enter 2 numbers. So we'll have our int a and our int b, and then we should write up the logic, what is supposed to do. So our logic will be very simple. So we'll have int times, which is a variable to hold our times, should be equal to a multiply by b. And then basically we are just putting up a printf, and this particular printf, it will tell us in a very simple thing, the multiple of 2 numbers equals to, and then here we are having our percentage d, and then basically we are having our times here. So basically this will be the logic, and the logic basically we are taking up the input from a user and then pass it on to times and then just printing up time. So basically there is also how are we going to call that particular function. So our function basically, how are we calling up our function? And our function, remember, is going to be called on main. So we call our function basically by its name. So the name, it is called multiple, and we are going to pass. What are we going to pass? We are going to pass whatever the user have entered. So for example, if the user has entered num1, so we're going to pass num1 and num2 inside and then terminate. So this is the way we are going to pass. So after getting up that, let's go to the C++ and see how we can actually implement it and run it. So basically we have said here we're supposed to declare our function. So our function was void mult, and then we are saying our function should take up a two parameter list, so it will be int a, int b, and then of course all statement must be terminated. So after doing that, let's go and actually define our function. So our function was void mult, and we had our int a, our int b. So as you see here, so now let's have our opening and closing bracket, and then we are going to write up our body or our logic. So our logic basically was what we are supposed to put up a variable called times, and that variable is going to be assigned a times b. And then basically what are we going to do? We are just printing. So we say print f, and by printing f, we are printing the words the multiple or the multiplication of two integers or two integer equals to, and then we are having up our format specifier %d, and then according to the syntax we are passing up times, and then we terminate. Each statement must be terminated. So now we are going to call. How are we going to call? Because we want up the user to enter the values. So here we are saying int num1, whatever the user is going to input, and then it's going to put up another num, and then you're going to have another one called result. So this is basically we don't have a result because we are not passing, it's not supposed to return any. So just have num1 and num2 basically, and then from here we want to tell the user to enter two numbers. So we say printf enter two numbers or two integers to multiply. So somebody has to enter two integers to multiply, and that particular statement must be terminated. So we terminate it, and then now we use up a scanf. This particular scanf we are using to capture the num1 and num2. So here we are having our format specifier %d and another specifier %d for num1 and for num2, and then according to the syntax we are supposed to store it onto address of num1 and the address of num2. and then all statement must be terminated, so we terminate our statement. And then now here we are calling up our function. So our function was called what? Mult. And in that particular mult, what are we calling? We are actually passing on our num1 and we are passing on our num2, and then we end up that particular statement. So basically this is how we call our function. So basically this is the program, how it will look like. So let's run the program. Yes, when we run the program, we are prompted to enter two integers to multiply. So we are entering 30 and 20, and actually we are told the multiplication of two integers is 600. So that makes up the end of this particular lesson. And however, don't forget to subscribe. In our next lesson, we are going to talk about what is the type 4 of user-defined function. Thank you.